Hello and welcome to episode 34 of Talking Shit About. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and each month I bring on a guest to talk about something they love, something they hate, and hopefully by the end we've all learned something. So I'm diagnosed bipolar and dyscalculia and who knows what else. I got so much out of this episode. It's really easy to think, oh, I'm broken, oh, why am I wired this way? But some things are out of your control, but we're going to learn some tips and coping skills to hopefully make your life a little bit easier. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk some shit.
I was like, what the fuck does that mean? I have friends that are firefighters and I know that they use soap.
And she was screaming at me over soup.
Fuck this, I am not ever talking to a Scientologist again. These people are all insane.
I'm putting my bricks in the dumpsters, motherfuckers. Do you see me, bitches? I'm throwing my bricks. And he's just like chucking bricks.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Shit About. I'm here today with a returning guest, Ferd Po. Ferd, welcome back on the show. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. So we are talking today about neurodiversity, which is I don't know if it's like a new term, but I feel like it's newer in like the common vernacular. So I'm excited to talk about this, and you have lived experience with it, which is super valuable. And so I'm sure people will get a lot out of this conversation. So, for those who aren't familiar with the term, what is your definition of neurodivergence?
So when I first started using this word really regularly, it came with my diagnosis, which I was diagnosed pretty late in life. And it was like, to me, this magic word that was like, oh, it explains so much. And it is still that. But I've always just broke it down to my brain is different, because that's generally what those roots mean, brain different. And I think that kind of remains true when you look at what neurodivergence is, which I think for the most part, you were just saying that it's fairly new for us as like a culture to really have a hold of this word on like in like a household way. And I think what we mostly think about is ADHD and autism, maybe more autism than ADHD, but it actually encompasses just different brains. So that's epilepsy, that's dyscalculia and dyslexia, things like that. And other things that we might think of as more physical disorders, but neurological is a physical system. So, but yeah, my definition for that, because it gets weird because you're like, okay, but all of our brains are different, right? And yes, I think in order for it to maintain its meaning and its purpose, this word, it's anyone whose brain functions in a way where neurotypical society makes it harder for them to function.
Thank you. That's a great definition, which leads perfectly into this next question, which is so funny because it's almost verbatim. So, this world that we live in, it's designed by and for people who are quote unquote neurotypical. And so, what are some of the challenges that people who are neurodivergent face in like the way that our society is built?
Totally. And I think that there are a few things that I can say that I'm about to say that anyone with any type of neurodivergence is going to relate to. But there's also some things that I'm about to say that may only relate to my specific neurodivergence, which is ADHD and autism. So, and even those, these symptoms and these manifestations of this can be so different. And so therefore the way that the world interacts with us can be so different, even within those two diagnoses. But I think the most encompassing thing that we can all relate to if you're neurodivergent is in any way is the stigma. I think that we've made a lot of progress with that, but telling somebody in order to get appropriate accommodations, which in school, work, all of these things, it's needed, and in your personal relationships you should definitely advocate for it, but in order to get these things you have to tell people that you are neurodivergent. And as soon as you do that, whether people are well-meaning or not, there's a lot of baggage that comes with that word. So I think no matter what your manifestations of your neurodivergence looks like, that is something we can all relate to. That's the number one thing. And then for me specifically, I think meeting the expectations of neurotypical people can be really challenging, especially I think that I'm pretty functional overall, and I think that I've had a very long life of masking and without even realizing I was doing that. And that can make it really hard to for people to understand why you're not meeting the expectations that they think you should have. So some of these things can be like, the things that we think of with ADHD specifically are like, oh, focus, and things like that. But my sleep rhythm is different. My circadian rhythm is different. So when I'm going to be able to function my best and all of that is going to be completely different. I'm not as accessible in the morning time. And it goes so much deeper than just a morning person or evening person. Another thing that I've struggled with, and I think this one is really hard to talk about. I think that this has a lot of stigma and it's something that a lot of neurodivergent people struggle with, and that's personal hygiene. It really takes me being on my A game to accomplish the things that need to be done in that to other people they don't even think anything of. It's a habit at this point. I think that can definitely be a struggle. And then I think communication, and this is like a really wide umbrella for a lot of many different things, but I think that there's so much room for the neurodivergent person and the neurotypical person in a completely genuine, well-meaning conversation to have a lot of misunderstandings about what the other's intent is. So those are the ones just off the top of my head, but I'm sure as we continue talking about this, I will think of things and interrupt my own self to tell you that.
Those were great examples. Like the two that I wrote were like really basic, more like technical things like working a 40-hour work week or filling out applications and tax paperwork and forms and documents. But I like your really broad umbrella of experiences that'll most people probably who are neurodivergent have experienced in one way or the other. So, as much as you're comfortable with, I'd like to hear your story and kind of how and when you started to notice that maybe I'm a little different than these like other kids.
So for me, it's incongruent a little bit from when I realized things were different to when I really understood why. And I think that's normal for a lot of late diagnosed people. So for me, as a child, I was very, I definitely wanted other people to like me, and we moved around a lot. And my peers, I couldn't understand what the disconnect was. And looking back, I probably wasn't making eye contact. I was probably not, picking up on social cues that at that age, I now understand social cues a lot better. It's not that we're unable to understand them. It's that it's like we have to approach it like kind of like a Jane Goodall kind of way, but they were just things I wasn't picking up on. And to me, not having an answer for that, it was like there was just something wrong with me. And then there were a lot of labels put on me that, kids soak this stuff up very much. So it was that I was lazy, and that comes from like executive dysfunction. It was that I was messy, again, like that executive function thing. And then, dealing with like this impulsive behavior and also these really big emotions and not being able to regulate myself. And so that was very much labeled as like, I think I was called Tizzy Lizzy was one of my nicknames growing up by my mom. But like just being known for like being a brat, essentially, because I would have these big meltdowns. And so these were things that I didn't like about myself because I didn't understand it. And it wasn't until my 30s, it wasn't until my 30s that I started understanding more about ADHD and autism, and really trying to seek those diagnoses. And the reason, that it's so wild to me that I wasn't diagnosed until I pursued it and really took the time to understand that is that I was institutionalized as a child. I was in a program for over a year that was meant to be like 2 to 3 months, but I was, they diagnosed me with oppositional defiance disorder, which is what you call like when you're an adult and you have that, I believe that it's a sociopath kind of thing. They, and depression, and which I do struggle with, but not as much as what I thought I did when I was putting all of this on that, all of these other symptoms onto that. So it it was so finally getting that diagnosis, and even before really knowing this is me, talking to other people who have similar stuff. I listened to a lot of this YouTube channel called How to ADHD, and I definitely suggest that to anyone who is like, is this me? But it was so healing in a way, but also so, and I'm like tearing up now thinking about it, because it just fills it with so much anger and grief for those decades prior where I struggled to do basic things. I couldn't keep a job. Keeping friendships and relationships was hard. It was, life was just so much harder. And the main thing that it healed, though, was all those labels that were given to me at such a young age that stayed with me and progressed, and I couldn't disprove in myself no matter how much I tried. They all of a sudden start to make sense, and that lazy is no longer lazy. It's, oh, I understand I'm having a problem with executive dysfunction, and not only do I understand it, I have resources on how to help me. And same thing with like that regulation. I'm having trouble with regulation. I know what helps. And so being able to like not only understand it, but and to forgive myself for those things, because it doesn't require forgiveness. It's nothing I had control of, but also to be able to minimize the damage that can be caused from having those neurotypical expectations.
You mentioned executive dysfunction a few times. I deal with this as well. But for those who haven't heard it before, can you tell us like a little bit what that is?
Yeah. So I think a really cool way to kind of think about this is that we all have a certain amount of ability for our executive function. And our executive function is doing tasks, essentially. And the way that this process generally goes is that we receive dopamine from thinking about doing the task, and therefore having the reward of the task. I need to do my dishes. When I do the dishes, they will be done. You get that spark of dopamine. That is what motivates us to do the task. And then you do it, right? But as you do those dishes, you're like, okay, that does take a little bit of my battery, but I still can get other things done. This is also true for neurodivergent people, or more specifically, I'm talking about an ADHD experience right now, but there are, you see this in many different versions of neurodivergence. So here's an ADHD person. We do not receive that dopamine from thinking of doing the thing. We just do not. So that motivation isn't there. And then on top of that, we say, okay, so I'm going to wait for it. But we also have memory issues, and for short term and stuff, so then we forget about it, and then we don't have a dish for dinner, and it continues on. But let's say I'm having a good day and I go, I don't have the motivation for this, but maybe I'm on meds, or maybe I have like a system figured out where I break down the task into smaller things or something like that. There's a bunch of different ways that we get through these things, but my battery is so much lower than a neurotypical person. So by the time a neurotypical person has brushed their teeth in the morning, washed their face, got dressed, got ready, did like their morning things around the house and drove to work, they still have a good chunk of their battery left. And mine is like almost gone. So this is a executive function, is just being able to do your executive tasks that keep you executive in a computer way. Like these are the things that keep your programs running. And that is the huge difference between a neurotypical person and a neurodivergent person with that.
Cool. Thank you. So you mentioned how to ADHD, which I will be sure to link in the comments. But what are some other tools or coping skills that you've found that have, and of course this might just, I doubt anything's like exclusively specific to you. I'm sure whatever you have to share is helpful for somebody out there.
Totally. Yeah. I think I have added a lot of things to my toolbox in the last few years. And I just want to preface this with, though it has made my life so much easier, and it just more accessible in general to use these things. Yeah, everyone is going to need a different combination of these things that work for them. And also it's it doesn't cure anything. And I think that's a really important thing to preface this with, because it's not, it is a thing that you will just live with. So I talked about tasks, breaking them up into smaller things. It's really common with ADHD and autism to feel like what other people would see as a simple task is, it's hard to break into it. It's hard to understand on a real level how to do that, even if it's something you've done 100 times. And that can look so weird to the outsider, But for me, it really helps to break these things down into tiny, tiny little doable tasks that I understand. And what that does is, one, it makes a plan for me. So I understand that it's like, okay, I've let my, kitchen get out of whack, and it is at a point now that I no longer understand how to even approach doing this. So if I throw it into little things like, we're throwing away all the garbage first, and then we're going to stack everything. And then what it does is it leaves me an out, for one, to be like, I have stacked things and I no longer feel able to do this. It leaves me an out where I've made things better for myself, but I can walk away and not feel like a failure. But what it also does is make every step way more approachable, so that the task isn't this like uncertain thing. So I think breaking things down is really important, for me at least. I know that physical activity, this is proven, physical activity is one of the number one things that helps ADHD people with emotional regulation, with their circadian rhythms, with focus issues, all of these things, even memory, it's been linked to helping with. However, I don't use that one. I would really like to, but I don't.
Me neither.
Yeah, yeah. But I just want to put it out there that I know that is the number one most helpful thing, which is just devastating. Um, but other things that I think are really helpful is to give yourself the correct expectations. So the reason why this helps so much is that it's really disheartening to give yourself this to-do list, and you're like comparing it to other people's to-do lists, and you're like, this is even less than theirs, surely I can do this. But it's okay that you can't. I give myself, when I'm planning out, when I'm doing well, and when I use plans, which I don't always do, I give myself the ability to do one, maybe two things that aren't work every day, because and other people can do that easy. There's no reason why they wouldn't be able to drop off the library books and go grocery shopping and do, and wash their car or whatever. But that's not me. I'm not going to be able to do that. And by making that an expectation, I have already set myself up for failure, and it makes it harder to do it again, because you start to associate these basic tasks with failure. So I think a really important thing to do is to give yourself the expectations that mirror what you're actually able to do. And a good exercise for that is to make a list of everything that you would like to do, and then kind of like see how much you get done before you're unable to do more, and then base the rest of that list off of that timing. And that kind of leads me to another thing, which is that I'm fairly time blind, in the sense that it could be a task that I've done every day my entire life. Unless I've specifically noted how long that takes, I have no idea how long that takes. It can be really hard to approach tasks if that's going to take me an hour and a half, I think, but really it takes 5 minutes, or vice versa. I can do that later. It's going to take 10 minutes. That is a 2-day activity. I can't tell you how many times I've done that while moving, where I'm like, oh, I cannot go to the dentist and move my whole house today. So I think, and that kind of goes into those expectations, but also, documenting these things. It seems silly to do, but it's really helpful. Another thing is that we have, a lot of people say that, we have an issue with object permanence. That's not exactly true, in the truest sense of what object permanence is, but it's not that we think it stops existing, but we will forget about things if they're not out. So if the more that you can organize your house in a way where the things that you want to use are out and in plain view, this helps immensely. So, things with hobbies, things like that. I have definitely spent countless hours scrolling on my phone because I think I have nothing to do. And then, later in the month, I open the closet and I'm like, oh yeah, this cool thing I was doing. So that's super helpful. is to have things in view. And also with your fridge, do not put your groceries or do not put your vegetables in the crisper. That's where they go to die. I think everyone can kind of relate to that on a certain level, but definitely ADHD people, put your sodas and your junk food in those crispers. Keep your vegetables out. Other things, my whole life is filled with these hacks, you know.
No,
Uh,
this is great.
I used to lose my keys and my phone all the time. That is not something that doesn't happen anymore, but it is so helpful to notice where you do end up putting them when you lose them, you know, like where do they go? Like, are they always in your bed? Are they always in the bathroom for some reason? Because guess what? That's where that goes. Create that spot, give them a tray or something in wherever that spot is. And that's just whether it makes sense to other people or not, that's just where they go now. Really lean into that kind of like absent-minded thing. I think going into things that are a little bit, I talk a lot about the executive function things because it's as a, you know, a single parent who also has a neurodivergent kid, it becomes really important to keep up routines, and it's really hard for me. So I think that's why a lot of my advice will, or just like the talking about what I use, is going to be related to that. But I think there's also some room to talk about interpersonal stuff. So because that's something that, you know, I think autism has, you know, is associated with, but it's definitely can be an ADHD thing as well. I think the number one thing that has helped me in my interpersonal relationships is one, communicating what I have issues with up front, you know, that there are going to be times when I have a meltdown, and it is my responsibility and my job as an adult to minimize that damage to the other people around me, and that becomes so much easier to do if I can let people know ahead of time. There's going to be times when I am just like, I'm hyperventilating and it's about something so small to you, but it's really this, you know, the straw on the camel's back of me having dealt with this stuff. And here's the best way to handle that. And for me, it's just generally to disengage and go elsewhere because I'm going to be fine. And I know that, but it's only going to create problems in a relationship if you try to engage at that point. And I think that that has fixed so much in my life. And also taking responsibility for your actions is still so important with neurodivergence, where it's like, yes, the reason why I had this meltdown is because this is my diagnosis, but it's important to take that responsibility anyway on how you make people feel, whatever effect happens from whatever your diagnosis is. That's really important to acknowledge how it affects other people and to be constantly curious about how to minimize that. And to also, and this is a really hard one, but it's true, if that is a boundary for someone, if you are ADHD and have a hard time keeping up with your house and you're in a relationship, a long-term relationship with somebody who cleanliness is really important, then, and that's a boundary for them, it is not like, that is not a hateful thing against like neurodivergent people, you know, that's not ableist for them to say, that's not what I can handle and to not be with you. And that's like an example. But in any case, I think that it's important to acknowledge that those boundaries within people are important. And it can be really heartbreaking as somebody who knows that you only have so much control over these things. But I think keeping that with you will help you develop relationships that are appropriate for your life where everyone's boundaries are being met.
Yeah, this is all great. Thank you, Ferd.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really easy when you're given a diagnosis and you have especially a lot of negative symptoms to get into a really negative mindset. So what are some of the more like positive aspects of being like what are the perks? What are the
Yeah,
benefits of
yeah,
being
absolutely.
neurodivergent?
I think that there is a lot. One, if you're struggling with a new diagnosis, welcome to a giant community of the coolest people. I think that that has been so helpful to, you know, it's so easy to feel alone, especially if you don't understand why you've been the way that you've been your whole life. And I think keeping in mind that there are so many people like you that have had very similar struggles that you'll relate to in a way that you maybe have not related to anyone, is super important to keep in your mind. Also, a lot of people have said that like ADHD or autism is a superpower, and that can kind of feel patronizing sometimes, but it comes from a couple things that we're really good at in general. Wide brush here, but it has been proven in studies. I don't have sources, so look it up or believe me or something, but that ADHD people are more empathetic on average than neurotypical people. We have really, really big feelings, so I think it's really easy for us to kind of understand why somebody else would have big feelings or feel, to be hyper aware. And some of that might be socialization as well, though, from not really understanding. There's like a disconnect between other people's expectations and social situations, and then having to be super aware of, oh, okay, so doing this doesn't work, but this does work. People liked that, they didn't like that, and being so super aware in that way that eventually you just become more empathetic. I really don't know, but it is a thing that we're associated with. Also, thinking outside the box. If your brain works differently on a fundamental level, you are going to come up with solutions or have a creativity in you that is going to be very different than neurotypical people and really unique. And I think that, our society doesn't necessarily put a lot of value on artistic stuff, unfortunately, but it is super, super valuable. All of the humanities are, and we excel at them. Other things, and it's not just with art, like I said, like just creative problem solving. And sometimes this can manifest as like being really good, really, really good at like mechanical things and knowing how they go together. But it could also manifest as, in that brainstorming phase, you don't have as many like mental blocks to something that makes sense to do. Also, going to hyper focus. So ADHD people are known for not having a lot of focus, and it's known as kind of a focus disorder, which is so weird because yes, we can have trouble focusing on a task because of that dopamine deficiency that I talked about. But when we're doing something that we really love to do or that really interests us, to the point of hurting our bodies, we will continue doing it. I have bad knees because I liked to game so much when I was like 17. And I just didn't move from a spot for like 16 hours. And that is like maybe not good. That's like an example where you're like, is that good? But I can also get into that place when I'm doing creative work or when I'm learning about something that I want to learn about. And again, these things don't have an innate value because there's not an innate connection to capitalist ideals with these things, but they are super, super valuable to us and the people around us. And so these are some of the things that I'm definitely proud of in myself and in my community.
And you've been working on advocating for people in your community, right?
Yeah. So it began probably okay, so being neurodivergent is one of my special interests, which is something that a lot of neurodivergent people have. And we're happy to info dump about these things. And because it changed my life to understand this about myself, and the more I understood about these diagnoses in general, I became very invested and I did do a lot of hyper focus on them. And so it's all I thought about, it's all I wanted to talk about, and I really wanted to help other people. And so just even, I think it was just like 6 months or something after my diagnosis, I began talking to a friend who believed that they had ADHD and they were afraid to seek a diagnosis or be told, sorry, that's not what's wrong with you. You're just bad, actually, or something. And I went with him to his doctor appointment and helped him talk about some of the stuff that he had been dealing with his whole life and how that has affected him. because when they're looking for these diagnoses, a lot of these things, like, yeah, anyone could say, yeah, I forget stuff sometimes, or yeah, I have trouble sleeping, we all do, or all these things where it's like, yeah, I get angry sometimes. But if it has affected you in such a way that it has been a major negative influence on your life for your whole life, then that's when a diagnosis comes into play. And that can be really hard to tell the difference living in that, knowing if that's what you're experiencing is normal or not. And so that was my first kind of like foray into that. And I have since then, I have reached out to and helped probably a dozen people find a diagnosis. Like there were some of those where it wasn't ADHD, it wasn't autism, but there was something there that needed to be dealt with, So I definitely am not going around being like, you have ADHD, you're autistic. And then, pushing people to, I'm not like a neurodivergence groomer. But I definitely think that if anyone has feelings that something is wrong, that they can't do the things that people tell them that they should do, then that deserves to be looked into. And so that's where a lot of my advocacy goes, is towards helping people find a diagnosis. But I also I try to help people, connect them to resources and community, because I think some of the best resources that we can find actually come within our community and aren't necessarily from like experts or whatever. Because as you said in the beginning of this, like your personal experience is you can't learn that. So that is where most of the advocacy goes, and it feels really good to do, and it has helped me in my journey to continue to understand myself.
That's great. Thank you, Ferd.
Mhm.
I'm a bad hostess, and I didn't do a good introduction of you in the beginning. But aside from an advocate, you're also a comedian. Would you like to share anything else about yourself and your work, or anything you want to share?
Oh, I not especially. I'm not plugging anything. I've actually it's funny because I actually have taken an extended sabbatical from comedy, and it
Ah,
is yeah, and also a lot of social things. I'm really hermiting. And I think it's because I was really successful in managing my neurodivergence in COVID, and I know that it is a time thing. So I'm kind of in this extended experiment to find out how much time I need for myself and for my home and for those around me before I start committing to kind of like more outward stuff, like comedy and that sort of thing. So I'm out of the game right now.
all right. Well, I'm glad you're taking care of yourself and focusing on you, because that's really important.
Yeah, totally. And I think we all deserve to do that. I think that is like one of the things that helped me get to a place where I was looking at a diagnosis, was because I had that time during lockdown to really look at myself in a way that I don't think we get on a daily basis. So just trying to recapture some of that.
Before we wrap up, any recommended reading or videos?
How to ADHD is like definitely something I would say to look into. Um, I I should have compiled a list actually, because I look at so much. There's a couple books I could direct people to, but I can't remember the names of them right now. So
That's
that's
okay. I didn't think to ask that beforehand, so it's all good. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on?
I would just say that if you are thinking, if you're curious about your own diagnosis, or just interesting in following through with that, if you feel like some of these things that I've talked about kind of strike a chord, the internet is such a beautiful place sometimes, and there are so many groups that you can find on Reddit or Facebook, or sites that are more dedicated to these things, where people are really open about letting you ask questions and learn about that, and about yourself, so that you can kind of decide if that's something you want to pursue. And I would just really encourage people to find those communities.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ferd. Appreciate you coming on again. It's always great to have you and to hear your voice.
Yeah, it was really great catching up a little bit beforehand too.
Yeah, totally. All right. Thanks, Ferd.
Yep, bye.
That's a wrap for this month's episode of Talking Shit About. We'll be back again next month with an interview about the technocracy, which I actually pronounced right this time, but you will hear me fail to pronounce it many times in the next episode. If you're listening to this when it comes out, I'm on my honeymoon right now. Shout out to my mom for watching my dogs for me and cats. If you would like to be a guest on the show or suggest a topic, you can email me at killizabeth.pod@gmail.com. That's KILLIZABETH.POD@gmail.com. You can also find me at Instagram at killizabeth.pod. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next month.